Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome everybody to the Safina Society Nothing But Facts live stream. Coming to you live from the state of New Jersey and coming from the La Cocina studio or Safina Society studio in the La Cocina building, which is our soup kitchen, which we pray bi'idhnillahi ta'ala will be having feeds, serving dinner 7 days a week by the year 2030. And I think the way we're going to do this is we're going to jump to 3 days a week, and then we're going to jump to 7 days a week. That's probably how it's going to go. So we ask Allah tawfiq, and we need all of your support with that. And you could do that at lacocina367.org. What is that 367? That 367 is it's our address. The address. There's a lot of La Cocinas out there. La Cocina, a lot of dinner, a lot of restaurants are called La Cocina. It literally just means the kitchen. And the concept is that we want to have this kind of very cozy environment. We don't want a soup kitchen that feels like a jail or like a school cafeteria. You ever been to a soup kitchen? They're miserable. It's almost like you're being punished. You eat there, you get punished. You're miserable. A couple of things that I want to talk about. What do I want to talk about first? A couple QAs before we get to our guest today. We have a nice young man who's doing dawah and a lot to say to us. Here's the first question that we're going to talk about. Can people from the lineage of Abbas accept zakah or sadaqah? That was a question that I received recently. Let's backtrack now. The answer to it is that the first question is, who is not allowed to get zakah? That's the first question. And the answer to that is that the Hashemites are not allowed to get zakah. Ali Muhammad refers to the Hashemites. Anybody, your al is anyone who shares your paternal grandfather. Okay? Anybody who your grandfather, who relates to your grandfather, that's your al. So we look at the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His grandfather was Shayba, also known as Abd al-Muttalib. But Abd al-Muttalib is the only son of Hashim. Okay? So Bani Shayba, Bani Hashim, Bani Abd al-Muttalib is all the same. So the summary is that number one point is if someone descends from Bani Hashim, they cannot accept zakah. Why? Because zakah is the filth of people's wealth. That's number one. Number two, when the Prophet ﷺ forbade sadaqah for them, did he mean sadaqat al-fard, as-sadaqah al-wajiba, or sadaqat tatawwa? And the answer is he meant by that the sadaqah that is wajib. Zakah. We call that zakah. Okay? Quran calls it sadaqah. Prophet ﷺ called it sadaqah. But Prophet also used the word zakah. So what is meant is zakah. As for sadaqah, it's makruh for them to accept sadaqah, but they may accept it. Okay. Zakah is what is meant here. That's number two. Number three, are there preconditions to this? And the answer is yes. The precondition of Ahl al-Bayt, I'm going to read it directly to you here. Okay. يقول محل, this is Dasuqi, حاشد Dasuqi عن شرح الكبير, شرح الصغير. محل عدم إعطاء بني هاشم منها إذا أعطوا ما يستحقونه من بيت المال. If they receive what they deserve from Bayt al-Mal. So if the Islamic government is giving them a khums, the government, forget Islamic government, the government, the Muslims are giving Ahl al-Bayt what they deserve from the khums, from the ghanima, or from any other source. So if the government is taking care of the poor members of Ahl al-Bayt, that's the precondition of them not receiving zakah. However, the moment that the government does not do this, like, for example, Muslims here in the West, and there's a poor person and they're from Ahl al-Bayt, there's no government taking care of them. Now, at this point, Like, what does he say here? فإن لم يعطوا وأضر بهم الفقر أعطوا منها وإعطائهم حينئذ أفضل من إعطاء غيرهم. At this point, they can accept zakat. Not only can they accept zakat, they go to the top of the list. Okay? إذ عطاؤهم أفضل من خدمتهم لذمي أو ظالم. Okay? So what he's saying here is that at that point, they would take priority too. They'd go at the top of the zakat list. All right? And it wouldn't be called zakat to be considered a gift. Okay? It would be considered for them to be a gift. All right? So that's the answer to that question. Let's take another question here before we go to our guest today. Is it forbidden to marry someone who committed zina, adultery, fornication, since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Zani la yankihu illa zanin aw mushrik"? Okay. The fornicating woman should not marry except another fornicator. This is ayah from Quran. So what is the meaning of this? Is now, if I know that a woman had a past, right? I know she has a past. Let's hypothetically say that. I can't marry her? That's the question. And the answer to that is, to begin with, what deems somebody a fornicator? That's the first question. And immediately what we eliminate is the rumor. The rumor here and there, or yeah, you know, she used to go to clubs, and before she was a Muslim, she used to wear short dresses. Or it's a guy, right? Oh, this guy used to always go to the club. We know that guy, right? No, that's a rumor. That's an assumption. That's not allowed. What deems someone a fornicator is two things. One of two things, or both. One, the widespread, well-known reputation. Like widespread, like no doubt about it. We know this. Okay, like for example, they have kids running around and they never got married before, so it's well known, mashhur, no doubt about it. Someone used to work as a prostitute. Okay, what about number two? Number two, it was proven in court. Hypothetically, we have a court, and they were proven to be a person of zina. They committed zina. Now, here's another thing. We ruled out the rumor. What else were we ruling out? The had punishment. If they received the had punishment, it erases what came before it, and therefore they're no longer deemed, categorized as fornicators. Okay? So that's two things are not fornicators. The one who's, we assume it, or there's a rumor, and number three is they received the had for fornication. So what makes someone a fornicator? A well-known, like, you know, this person was a prostitute. We know that. Or we know this guy, he's got kids everywhere. Okay? It's well-known. Okay? Or two people, we all knew they lived with each other. Well, when a man and a woman live with each other, what are they doing here? Okay? Not just splitting rent. Okay? So those are the two. Or they were proven to be so in the court. Now, as for the ruling of marrying one, let's say somebody was established as a fornicator. What is the ruling for marrying them? This is the second question now. The ruling for marrying them is discouragement, not prohibition. Why is it discouragement? Because the reason is that the verse is deemed, some said it was abrogated. The moment some of the ulama said this is abrogated, okay, then at that point it downgrades to being speculative in nature. All right? Who's saying this? Hashayt al-Dasuqi. وَكَرِهَ تَزْوِيجُ امْرَأَةٍ زَانِيَةٍ أي مشهورة بذلك وإن لم يثبت عليها ذلك. So he's saying it's a prohibition in the spirit of discouragement rather than sinfulness. Okay? Spread this to your friends, because many people say, oh, I don't marry this convert, but I think maybe. Now, by the way, you're not allowed to ask. Okay? Not allowed to ask. Not allowed to ask somebody, hey, do you commit zina? You're not allowed to ask this question. You are allowed to ask, do you have a disease, STD, that will transmit to me once we marry? That you're allowed to ask. Okay? Now listen to this. هذا إذا ثبت عليها. It's discouraged if it's proven or it's widespread that the person is an adulterer, fornicator. Okay? وَأَمَّا مَا يَتَكَلَّمُ فِيهَا, we mentioned this. Just a rumor about somebody does not render them a fornicator. Okay? There's no discouragement on that. There's no discouragement on marrying someone. Now, we're talking about by Sharia. You personally may say, no, I'm not coming near this person. But let's say somebody was a boxer. Let's say somebody was an athlete. Now, you can't have somebody, a professional athlete, you know how they live. Let's say someone is a rock star, and then they become Muslim, they clean up their act, now they're wearing a thobe and a kufi. Well, you know how they used to live? Yeah, but that's just a rumor and an expectation and a speculation. Discard it. It's your choice, but you have no discouragement in the Sharia to marry this person. So, يفيد, okay, لا يفيد, okay, لا يفيد حرمة نكاحهم. It does not indicate the prohibition to marry them. لأن نقول, because we say المراد لا ينكحها في حال زناها أو أنه بيان للأليق. Okay, بيان للأليق. It's a clarification of what is more appropriate. It's more appropriate that a person who has a squeaky clean past marry a person with a squeaky clean past. It's more appropriate that the rock star who knows the world of the streets and the clubs, who became Muslim, cleaned himself up, and now he wears a thobe and a cap, that he marries the woman who also used to go to clubs and she converted, she cleaned her act up. By the way, these days we don't even say converted. She just cleaned her act up. She's Muslim and she used to live that way. That's more, they're going to understand each other better. This is just all in recommendation and in common sense, not in religious rulings. Okay, I discussed this with Murabit Benavides, Sheikh Murabit Benavides, and I discussed the previous question on the zakah of the Ahl al-Bayt with Sheikh Rami, and we went over this text from Hashiyat al-Dasuqi. All right, so again, those are two questions in Maliki fiqh, all right, that some people have been asking, and we're going over it. All right, here's another question. This time, it is a simple question in Aqidah. Now, here's the thing with me. I'm not arguing anymore. I got to tell you, this is not going to be easy. But I really want to follow Malik, and we're going to get to our guest right now. Okay, but we have a very special guest because he's a young man who's in the world of dawah, and I really care about those young people who are in the world of dawah. Okay, so what we're talking about here is I love Malik's statements. I'm going to read some of these statements and get to the last point before we go to our guests. Some of these statements that Malik talked about and Hassan al-Basri talked about, the early Muslims. Malik saw two people arguing, and it's assumed that he's arguing about religion, or arguing about deen, arguing about aqidah, right? He stood up, he dusted off his shawl, put it back on, and left, and he said, Antum harb, you are war. What does he mean, you are war? It means this is the beginning of wars. Wars always begin with words. Okay? Hassan al-Basri, before Malik, came upon people arguing. He said, these are people who just are bored with ibadah. They're bored with worship. They're bored with memorizing Quran. They're bored with doing dhikr. Right? They're bored with salah. And they found talking to be easier. It's easier to talk. It's easy to talk. Hard to do ibadah. Okay. Here's another one from Imam Malik. He says, where is it? Yesterday's on Imam Malik. Here it is. وكان مالكا يقول المراء والجدال في العلم يذهب بنور العلم من قلب العبد. Arguing about religion and debating on religion, essentially that's all of the Twitter world. 95% of Twitter is argumentation. He says here, it takes away the light of knowledge from the heart of the slave. Malik was asked, someone said to Imam Malik, I know the Sunnah, or somebody knows the Sunnah, should they argue on behalf of it? Malik said no. Say what you believe and move on. Let me say here, something that has been discussed lately. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, خَلَقَكُمْ وَمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. He created you and what you do. And he says, okay, خالق كل شيء. Allah is the creator of all things. Okay. And what does that mean? That includes our actions. Bringing things out of non-existence is solely in the power of Allah. What we do is called kasb. We acquire it. How do I acquire a created action? By intending it. I intend it. All right. Do I intend it, or does Allah will this thing? The answer is Allah wills that you intended it. Okay. Allah wills that you intend it. Where we get this from? The Quran. وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. Where do we get the doctrine of kasb? لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَعَلَيْهَا مَا اكْتَسَبَتْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the soul gets what, not what it creates. لَهَا مَا خَلَقَتْ. No. لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ. You get what you acquire. All right. And so we know that no human being is a creator. You will never bring anything out of non-existence. Right now, in non-existence right now, is a white mug in front of me. In front of me, right in front of my eyes. That's in non-existence right now. Now, boom, it exists. On this plane of space, now it exists. It's forbidden for anybody to believe that they're the one who brought it into existence. Only Allah brings things into existence. Okay? We make the, now, in perception and everyday language, yes, we do stuff and we're allowed to talk about that. We're allowed to say, you did it. He did it. You're responsible. I'm going to do this. By Allah's will. That's why Allah says, say, inshallah. Okay? So, yes, by everyday perception and language, we do stuff. But in reality, we don't do stuff. We are not the creators of things. Okay? We are not the creators. Wallahu khalaqakum wa ma ta'malun. We're not the creators of things. Okay? So that's a point in Aqidah that's important to know, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the sole doer and creator of things, and what we possess is kasb. All right, let's bring our guest on. We have a young man here. His name is Yusuf Ponders, and I told you part of our philosophy of getting guests, I like to bring in the young converts who are active in the field of dawah. I like to know what's going on in that world, and that's who we have today. Yusuf Ponders, let's bring him on. Bismillah. Welcome to the Safina Society Nothing But Facts live stream. How are you? Is he muted? Oh, you're muted real quick. Unmute.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Ahla wa marhaba.
Alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. So welcome to the to our live stream. Why don't we kick it off? Tell us about yourself, your background, how you came into Islam, and then what kind of dawah work that you do.
Yes, British. Mother is Polish Catholic. Father Scottish Catholic. Raised as a Catholic. Went to a Polish Sunday school. Was baptized, christened, all of that. When I was about 9, my dad passed away. That sort of moved me towards atheism. Went to a secular school after that point, and just sort of drifted away from the idea of God. Became quite hedonistic.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of grew up like that for quite a while. Went traveling for a bit around Asia. So I'd got to spend a bit of time in like Buddhist temples in Korea and in Thailand, and ended up running a bar in Malaysia. And the island that I was running a bar on was a Muslim island, and they had the adhan playing in the morning and in the evening, and when we were like getting ready to go to bed, the Muslims would be waking up looking fresh while we looked quite the opposite. And and I had a few Muslim friends sort of growing up, working as a youth, and got into things like philosophy, discussions on religion. Ended up studying at university, and just sort of like intra-religious polemics. And then eventually, like going through like the process of looking into all these different things, the only one that was really ticking all the boxes was Islam, especially with regards to like things like Tawheed, reading the Quran a couple of times, and sort of developing a relationship with that. and reading about the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahabi radiallahu anhum. And and it was just, I sort of grew more and more and more attached to Islam, more so than any other religion. And eventually, when I was about 24, so about 10 years ago now, I took my Shahada and then never looked back.
So tell me something. What took you to Malaysia of all places? Was it just purely a vacation?
No, it was an accident. Funnily enough, so I decided that I wanted to travel and go backpacking. And I didn't really have a plan about where I wanted to go. I just knew where I was going to begin. And I just thought what I'll do is, because it was in 2012 in the spring, and I thought I'll start northernly, just at the beginning of spring when the weather's warm. And then as I head south, when it gets towards winter time, I'll be at the equator pretty much. And then I can sort of skip winter and just enjoy sunny weather. And so I began in South Korea, and then I went from there to Taiwan. And it was just, I had no sort of time scale. I was just like, I've got this amount of money, I'll make it last as long as I can. And as I was going south, I was supposed to go from Taiwan to Vietnam. But for whatever reason, the flights wouldn't take me directly there. I had to fly over Vietnam to Malaysia, transfer, and then go back. But I messed up the visas. So when I got to Malaysia, they wouldn't let me in Vietnam. But then, because I'm a British citizen, you get 3 months on arrival for free in Malaysia. So I was like, oh, we'll just stay here. And so then we just went exploring. We were in Kuala Lumpur to begin with, bumped into someone that was going into somewhere called Tioman Island, and ended up going there. And it was a bit madness. It was like 18 months of backpacking, just sort of floating along. But about 8 of them 18 months were in Malaysia in particular.
That's amazing. And that's really like one of those ways that Allah Ta'ala guides a person and directs their life through these little, what we perceive to be as accidents. And in fact, they're by design, subhanAllah.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, you said checks the boxes. What were your boxes?
So Tawheed, specifically. So monotheism makes the most sense, and the emphasis on that in Islam. Also, the character of Jesus, alayhi salam, that played a huge role, because I was thinking about Jesus, whether or not I believed he was alive, a real person. And specifically, I was sort of looking at the 3 different approaches to him. So the approach of the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims. And the one that the Muslim approach seemed to me to be the most reasonable. Specifically, and especially if you're reading the Bible, obviously, like a lot of it is questionable about whether or not it's authentic. But there are certain stories when you're reading it, they don't make much sense when you're reading them from like a Trinitarian perspective, but they start to make a lot more sense from an Islamic one. So that was like a huge part of it for me. And then, like I mentioned, so I come from a pretty like rough background. So we grew up in a council estate, which is like government funded housing. Most of me and my friends were like from single parent families. So always someone in the family either addicted to drugs or in and out of prison or just not present. So we had a pretty sort of crappy upbringing in this area. And then when I was reading the Quran, a lot of the things that were quite controversial, like the rulings, halal and the haram, I was looking at my people and the people around me, and I was asking, would we be better or worse if we were to implement Islam in our lives? And the answer to the question would be, we'd be much better off. Like I said, my father died from a heroin overdose. My uncle, a year later, his brother from alcohol poisoning. We've had people in our circles commit suicide, people that have gotten into huge debts because of gambling, and they just have to sort of lie low and float about and try and stay off the record. Loans with interest causing huge problems. Theft, like stealing even among friends, was quite an issue. I'd had like sort of parties with people that I thought were close friends, and then valuable things would go missing out of my house. So like there was a lot of mad sort of little things, and I was looking at the Quran and the Sharia, and I was like, well, this, although it's controversial, I think it would definitely make a lot of sense if we were to believe this and implement it as controversial as many of the rulings may be, it would definitely motivate people not to behave in this manner. And if they
Yeah.
weren't to behave in that manner, I think we would be better off as a collective. So it's that, and then the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, thinking about, like, is it more likely that he was telling the truth or he was a liar? Or I think I was watching a lot of videos on YouTube at the time as well. And these sort of arguments were being put forward, and then looking at the life of the Sahaba and the type of people that they were, how Islam was able to spread the way that it did. All of these things. There's quite a lot, but it was a long time of looking into it. I started looking into it properly when I was about 17, and I didn't take Shahada until I was about 24. So it was about 7 years of thinking about it, looking into it, traveling, talking to people, especially when I was running the bar. I was talking to many people from many different backgrounds, and as someone who's like a barman, because it wasn't like a big place, it was like a little shack on a beach. And I was running it with some guy from Canada, and me and him would just sort of sit there and talk to people.
Here or Malaysia?
In Malaysia.
Malaysia.
And I had I don't know if you know what fire poi is.
Who?
It's like fire poi.
Never
Have you heard of it? It's like Kevlar balls on the end of a chain that you set on fire and you spin them around. So I used to do that for like entertainment.
I see.
And yeah, it was quite. It was an interesting experience, but it would attract a lot of different kind of people, and so you just end up doing that and then sitting down, and people want to come talk to you quite a lot because you're this random white guy that plays with fire, and yeah, it was part of the whole process, I guess, and sort of talking to Jews and Christians and Hindus and pagans and atheists and this, that, and the other, and then studying philosophy, and a part of that was philosophy of religion as well. All of these sort of really developed my certainty in Islam.
MashaAllah, wonderful, really interesting story. Now, if you're on Instagram, you should be having fine volume. The volume should be good, but hop over to YouTube. Get about 140 viewers here on YouTube. Hop over so you can see both screens, number one, and you can ask questions, number two. All right, so here's my first question. So you enter Islam, and what was your method of learning at that time?
When I first take Shahada,
Yeah.
So I was quite isolated, to be honest. I didn't really. Most of it was just reading the Quran. So I read it a couple of times by myself, and then just sort of going over that, reading the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then just YouTube videos, different articles, that kind of thing. But for 2 years, I just sort of kept myself to myself and didn't really bother getting involved in the community at all. I didn't really like it either because I think I can. I went to a mosque once with a friend who was a Muslim, and I said, "Whatever you do, just don't tell anyone. Like, I just want to come in." And there was something about the end of days. I don't know, some talk. And the sheikh was familiar with me as a non-Muslim, and he knew me and my friend. And I just said to my friend, "Don't say anything." And so we went to go say hello to the sheikh. And then my friend said something, and then he was like, "Oh, mashallah," and he made an announcement, and then millions of people came running over. And I just didn't enjoy that at all. Like, I had pretty much a massive anxiety attack. I don't like huge crowds of people sort of gathering around you.
We're talking about London, right?
This is Manchester.
Manchester, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't quite enjoy that, and so I think after that I just avoided going to the mosques.
Yeah.
And that was for maybe 2.5 years. And eventually I ended up getting married, and then when we found out that we were going to have a daughter, I just went sort of super practicing. At that point, because I think there was a bit of a transition. So although I believed in Islam and I took Shahada, I was like on my own. I didn't have a teacher or anything, and so I was pretty jahil for the most part. And I hadn't really established the prayer in my life properly for quite a while, and because I was on my own, I was struggling trying to learn the Arabic and all of that. But then when I found out that I was going to have a daughter, I went looking for a teacher and found a sheikh in Manchester. Him and the people that he worked with took me under their wing, and they invited me to their community centre, and I went there every Saturday for about 2-3 years, and just sort of learning the basics of fiqh and aqidah and all of that. And then once that sort of concluded, because they had these like formal classes, the sheikh would give me sort of private lessons as well, like 1-to-1, and then eventually there was a couple of us that would join these classes. And yeah, slowly sort of built that up, and then reading different books as well on my own and looking into aqidah more broadly, that kind of thing.
It's amazing how having a child transforms a person.
Yeah.
Person won't care much for himself. You bring the same thing and you put it on their child. All of a sudden, he doesn't like it, or he really wants it, right? So, really, having kids totally transforms a person, and
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
why whenever I see some young person doing something, I'm like, just give it time. When they marry and have a kid, they're gonna stop all this nonsense and they'll grow up and
Inshallah.
start, to be different. And also, a lot of times, a person's arrogance goes down when they have. The older their kids get, their arrogance really should go down, because one of the wisdoms of children as they grow up, they have their own views,
Yeah.
right? And you realize, hold on, I can't even convince my own kids on certain things, right? So I'm like, it's just either just my views or not universal. Some things you hope that, like Islam itself, that should be able to be transmitted, but your specific likes and dislikes, all of a sudden you realize in your own home someone doesn't agree with you, right?
Yeah.
So having kids is really part of a person's polishing. It polishes you off, and it cuts off your edges, and it also makes a person realize what really matters and what doesn't. So that's an amazing point. Now let's shift over to something else. You wrote a book, Nihilism.
Yeah.
Tell us about that book. Like, how did that come about? And what's the book all about?
I'm going to use the word accident again, although there are no accidents. But yeah, so it was kind of unintentional on my part, at least. So like I mentioned, I studied philosophy at university.
Mm-hmm.
It was a broad subject. It was in Manchester, and you study pretty much everything. So we were studying like metaphysics and ethics and religion and ontology, all of this different crazy stuff. And one thing in particular that really interested me was Nietzsche, because I come from an atheistic background, and a lot of his thinking sort of resonated with my history.
Mm-hmm.
And I was interested generally in the feelings of meaninglessness. And I think within, especially sort of council estate communities or poorer communities, there can be this sort of battle with nihilism, or the feeling that life is meaningless, and addiction and sort of poverty and all these kind of things. And a lot of these things end up leading to things like depression and suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And having a lot of experience with that myself and with people around me, it was a subject that sort of really took my interest. So I ended up doing my dissertation on nihilism in particular, and the meaning of life and so on and so forth. It wasn't necessarily from an Islamic perspective at the time when I was doing the degree. But then later on, once I'd finished university, I was still really interested in the subject. So I carried on looking into it and sort of developing my thoughts on the whole thing. I started a YouTube channel because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And once you finish uni, you've got to think, okay, now I need a job. And the job center was like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And they said, well, if you want to become self-employed, if you write us like a business plan, we can review it. And if we think it's worthwhile or if it's feasible, we'll support you. You don't have to look for a job and you can just develop yourself. And so I was like, okay. So I wrote the craziest thing I could think of. I was like, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. I want to write a book. I want to do essays. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I thought they would just reject it, but qadar of Allah, they didn't. And so I started my little YouTube channel and started making little videos and writing little essays. And then eventually, like I was sending these different da'is, and no one was really responding or engaging with it, apart from randomly one night, Subor Ahmed read an article that I wrote, and he loved it, and he emailed back, and he wanted to speak to me, and so we ended up exchanging numbers, and we just sort of hit it off really quickly, became really good friends, and then he invited me onto his channel, to talk about my dissertation on the meaning of life, and about the other article that he'd read. And so we were just sort of engaging in that, and like from sort of developing a connection with him, I ended up developing connections with other da'is from like IERA and people that were sort of connected to them through YouTube. And eventually, what happened is obviously Hamza Zorsis used to be the CEO of IERA, but then he left and set up the Sapiens Institute. And when that happened, Sabot Ahmed recommended me to Hamza Zorsis. And so they approached me to write an article for them. And originally they just said, do something on nihilism. And the target was about 3,000 words. But I've got a tendency to ramble. So 3,000 words turned to 10,000, which turned to 30,000.
Wow.
And it wasn't really done. And so I had to like say, this has gone a bit sort of over the top, because everything sort of opens and opens and opens and opens. And there's way too much to say on a subject. And so I just said, I've done this amount. I'll give it you now. You publish it as a part 1, and then I'll do the next bit as a part 2. And then that just got crazy as well. And I was like, this is getting really silly now. It's huge. And I've sort of expanded part 1 as well. And like, it's just become ridiculous. He says, how about them, rather than doing it as 2 separate essays, we'll just put them together and we'll publish it as a book. And then I was like, well, if it's going to be a book, I might as well like ramble a bit more. And so there was a load of extra little bits, and it just sort of accidentally, quote unquote, developed into a book on nihilism, but from the perspective of Islam this time, what causes it, what are the consequences, and how does Islam combat it, with regards to the specific issues that I sort of lay out in the beginning of the book. So that's kind of how that happened by accident.
Good. So you have a Sapiens Institute publication on nihilism. So why don't you give us like, so that's how the book came about. Yeah. What about your actual concepts of nihilism, things related to that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so nihilism is quite a broad subject, which is why I ended up writing a book about it. But it can be broken up into a number of categories, but mainly its focus is the idea that life is meaningless, that there's no purpose or function behind anything. And personally, I feel that atheism sort of leads to that, this idea that, if there is no creator, if everything at bottom, if you take like a naturalistic perspective, if it is just snooker balls hitting snooker balls, that there can't be purpose to these things, because everything's sort of transpired by accident or randomly. And if that is the case and the universe doesn't have any meaning, then by greater reason, every single part of that universe would also not have any meaning or purpose.
Correct, yeah.
And so you've got like the sort of cosmological nihilism, which is the grand one, everything. The existential nihilism, which is the sort of the individual one. And then you have...
What was the first one you said?
Cosmological, which is the
universe.
Everything, the universe. And then existential, which is the individual.
Okay.
And then you've got moral nihilism or error theory, which is to do with the idea that, ethics is meaningless, or ethical discussions, morality is meaningless. There is no such thing as good or evil. And then you've got epistemological nihilism, which is there's no such thing as truth, or that you can't attain true knowledge or knowledge at all. And then there's like a political nihilism, which is sort of popularized in Russia during the Soviet era, which is mainly about the idea that like politics is, especially modern politics, is somewhat pointless. And that sort of led to other sort of ideas and the back and forth with that vacuum. But it's a very, very broad subject. And me being someone who was sort of raised as an atheist, not as an atheist, so raised as a Catholic and then leaving and becoming atheist, it was something that really, really impacted me. And when I was thinking about these things, and I was a bit of a hedonist. So when I was younger, I liked drinking alcohol. I was a bit of a pothead. And I engaged in that sort of cycle. But again, like the more you engage with these things, the less of an impact they have on you, and the more you need to sort of have any sort of a feeling like when I was, because my family is Scottish and Polish, so you start drinking quite early. And I think the first time I remember really getting drunk was the millennium, which would have been 2000. So I'd have been about no, it would have been younger than that. It was probably year 6. We broke into a warehouse. And obviously I was Jahil at the time. We lived a different life. And we found loads of alcohol. We stole it. And then we gave it to all of the kids on the estate. So we all got really drunk together. And we would have been about
12 years old.
Not even that, about 9 or 10.
Wow.
I was 9 or 10. My brother was a year and a half younger than me, so he's about 8. And there were some kids there as young as 6. And we didn't need much. Like, we maybe had 1 bottle, and then we were absolutely off our heads.
Wow.
But then by the time I was running that bar, for example, I could drink a lot and it not really affect me. And you need more and more and more. And it was the same with the weed. Like, you start smoking a tiny bit when you're younger, and like it hits you really badly. But then by the time I was like 20, I was having to smoke a lot in order to have the same amount of impact. And it's unsustainable. Like, it just grows and grows and grows. It ends up costing too much. The thing I like to sort of use as an example is, Pinocchio. Do you remember the original one from Disney?
Yeah. And he goes to the land of fun or whatever it's called.
Yeah, Pleasure Island.
Pleasure Island, yeah.
Honest John is selling it to him as well. I think he's got the name Honest, so how can you not trust him? And we were kind of like Pinocchio. We went to Pleasure Island, and we were doing all of these things as an expression of our freedom. So we were drinking, we were smoking, we were chasing girls, we were doing this, we were doing that, because we were free, and why not? And if you remember in Pinocchio, they're doing all these things. They get to do what they want, and they see anyone who tells them to do anything, anyone who sets rules upon them as an oppressor. And eventually, all of the kids turn into donkeys, or they make asses out of themselves. And when they become donkeys, they become enslaved by the master of Pleasure Island.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching that happen to me, to my friends, to the people around me. All of the things that we were engaging with in order to like express our freedom, to have fun, slowly became things we were dependent upon. So we became addicted to alcohol. We became addicted to drugs. We became addicted to women. We became addicted to this and to that. And we became slaves to it. It no longer was something that was fun to us. And like the donkeys at the end, it was something that was a source of pain, or a way of trying to deal with pain, but it was only really a temporary fix. And so many of my friends became alcoholics. Some became addicted to drugs. Some of them died as a result of that. It basically, you start to feel the nihilism of it, of this cycle. And everyone seems to just be working the same jobs, going on this sort of, I'm just earning money during the week and sacrificing myself in order to spend all of that money on the weekend, on a night out, and on this, and on clothes, and on cars, and on women, on this, and that, and the other. And eventually it all just starts to feel rather meaningless. And for me in particular, like I said, I went traveling. The traveling was more as an attempt to sort of run away from that cycle and to forget this sort of weekly routine and living for the weekend kind of thing. And so I just saved up like crazy for 9 months, packed my bag, and then just left. But then even that sort of was not necessarily good for me, because I became addicted to the chaos. I became addicted to the lack of structure, the lack of plan. And eventually that runs out. I ran out of money and I needed to come back. And again, like trying to get back into that meaningless cycle of, and the general talk that the average person that comes from communities like I was raised in sort of talk about. I just couldn't deal with it anymore. And it just all seemed rather silly. Everyone was sort of stuck in the present, on the dunya, on things that turn to dust. And I was constantly asking the question, is there not more to life than this? Or is life really this meaningless and this pointless? And so like that's obviously when I'm sort of engaging with other religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, paganism, Islam, my original religion, Christianity, Judaism, and thinking about the claims that these things or these ideas were making, and which ones made sense and which ones didn't. And the more I was sort of thinking about atheism, the more it led me to these ideas of nihilism and meaninglessness. And the more I could see it sort of seeping through everyone around me.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it just, there's a melancholy in that exploration, but it sort of sucked me in. And I found it incredibly interesting, like mapping that out and trying to figure it out. And so, I sort of, I guess, what led me to be quite interested in, the existential philosophers, Nietzsche and things like that. And then as well with religious ideas and religious propositions.
Well, one of the things you said about these pleasures becoming sources of enslavement, that's actually lends a lot of meaning to what we find often in Quran and Hadith, that a person must love Allah and His Messenger and striving for their sake more than anything else. And people oftentimes wonder, like, why would that be the case? Even my own self. And the answer to that is that in the soul of the human being, what Allah is telling us, I made your soul. I know exactly what benefits your soul.
Yeah.
And that at the very core, there's a core of our hearts and our souls is not filled by anything except Iman.
Yep.
And then, but once that's filled, then you can enjoy everything without becoming a slave to it.
Right? Yeah, definitely.
And that's the beauty of it.
So the Quran sort of makes mention of this a little bit. Have you seen those who take their desires as their gods?
Yeah.
And then the concept of ibadah in Islam is also quite interesting in conjunction with this. That ibadah is a holistic thing. It's anything that you do for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even if you smile or give charity, if you do this for the pleasure of Allah, for the pleasure of your Lord, it becomes ibadah. It becomes an act of worship. And then when you're reading this verse about those who make their own desires as their gods, it raises the question, okay, so what is this idea of a god and what is worship in relation to these things? And because what they're doing is seen as an act of worship to something that they see as a god, it sort of paints ibadah as this general thing. And then you ask yourself, okay, so the human being, everyone has this sort of value hierarchy. Everyone has like a pyramid of things. And you cannot not have it in the same way that Allah says, and everyone has a qibla to which they turn. Like you can't not face a direction. If you like, if someone's saying, why are you facing the Kaaba? Don't face any direction. It's like, well, I can't. I have to face east, west, south. Like I can't be directionless.
Yeah.
And in the same way, you can't be without values. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala essentially should be at the top of that. Why? Because Allahu Akbar, He is the greatest. He is the creator, the sustainer of everything. Everything is dependent upon Him. And so He is the only thing that is worthy of being at the top of your value hierarchy, the thing that you should value the most. But if you don't value Him, it doesn't mean you don't have a value hierarchy.
True.
You still have things that you value the most. And if it's not Allah, then essentially it has to become something that Allah has created.
Mm-hmm.
It has to become something that is in the dunya. And so the atheist, whether or not they recognize it, keeping in this, this broad idea of what ibadah is, as the what you do for the thing that you value the most. If the thing you value the most is yourself, your own desires, the objects of your desires, a woman, power, a job, money, whatever it is, essentially, if those things dominate your mind and your soul and your heart, and they sit at the top of your value hierarchy, and those are the things that when the second you wake up in the morning, you think about, and every action you do it in relation to that, in order to achieve it. If it's a woman, like you dress, the job you get, the things you buy, all of it is in terms of what is she going to like, what will make her happy, what will please her. Or if it's power, what is it that I can do that will give me more of that? Whatever it is, essentially that thing has become your God.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that controls and directs you. And if it's anything in the dunya, eventually it's going to turn to dust. It's not going to be something that's going to benefit you.
Yeah.
And it will be lost. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the eternal. He is the one with the perfect names and the perfect attributes. And He's the only one that's befitting of that position of being the thing that you value the most. And anything other than that leaves a vacuum in the heart. it leads this. I like making reference to films. You know, the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the first one with Captain Barbosa where he's talking about the curse of the treasure, and he's describing it, and he's like, you know, whenever I eat an apple, it turns to dust in my mouth, and I can't enjoy drink. It just flows through my body and just falls out. And what was funny about that scene is that's the predicament of the son of Adam. That's that's a human issue. It's not just these pirates that have been cursed because of their greed. It is essentially what all of us have to deal with. Is this everything? You know, the law of diminishing returns. You know, you can engage with things in life, but you know the pleasures wear off. You can get a new phone, a new car, a new this, a new that, but eventually it stops having an impact. And people think if only. And the Hadith sort of makes mention of this as well. Like Adam, alayhi salam, is greedy. The son of Adam is greedy. He wants a mountain of gold, and if he achieves it, he's not satisfied. He wants another, and another, and another, and this links to these ideas a lot.
I think anybody who's thoughtful has to have come across this. I remember when I was young, the best thing you could possibly get is a pair of new sneakers, right? And you get these pair of new sneakers and you look at them all night, and sometimes you even sleep with them. And then you go to school, you monitor make sure nothing touches it, and you don't even walk right? You just walk like this so you don't bend them.
You're tiptoeing.
Right. And then weeks later, you know, you realize, you look at your shoes and you're like, they're just like the old ones. They're all beat up now, and they're all bent and bent in the middle, and everything's all messed up and beat up now. So you realize, like, well, I was so pumped about it. I was so excited about it. Now it's nothing. Any other pair of clothes that you get, right? You hang it up for the first time. After 2 weeks, it's all completely like any other garment that you had. And you continue making these observations, and a lot of young people, their life was at some point was sports, right? Like literally your life is sports. And one of the observations I really remember was that, like most young people, my life was sports too. The sport that I used to watch religiously, and like knew every player in the league and every statistic. And I realized one day that when the game is over, I'm like completely down. And it's not like the era of YouTube where you could watch past stuff and people commenting 24/7. No, if it wasn't on TV, you're not watching anything. There's nothing. So once the game was over on a Sunday, you know, like a 2:00 game or 3:00 game ends at 6:00. Now it's nighttime. Now you got school next day. It was so depressing, right? And modern kids, they don't recognize this because you can watch YouTube all day and commentary all day. But I thought to myself, why am I torturing myself? Like, I'm totally torturing myself with this attachment. I'm attached to something that constantly comes to an end. Every time it comes to an end, you're torturing yourself. So you got to get yourself attached to something that you can have access to all the time.
Yeah.
And that's exactly, if you think about it, that's just a thought process. But if you think about how Prophet Ibrahim taught his people about animism, worship of the sun and the moon and the stars, he said, you don't have access to these things 24/7. If you love the sun, you don't have access to it all the time. If you love the moon, if your worship is the moon, you don't have access to it all the time. And so I think this concept is built into the human being.
Yeah.
You always want to feel you always want to feel good at every single moment. You want to feel some kind of meaningfulness. But if you put your meaningfulness in a sport, there's a time where you have to stop playing that sport and stop watching that sport. Put your thing in clothes, your clothes gets old. Even in a person, that person stops being new to you, right? Yeah. Their face, your eyes get accustomed to their face.
Yeah, but the flaws become apparent and their perfection diminishes. And
the flaws become apparent, or they snap at you one time and that's it. It's done with. You're being enamored with this person. This infatuation is done with. They don't reply to you once, right? All of a sudden you hate them. So, or the infatuation is gone. So that's like a process I think people naturally go through. And that's why it's so important to realize what it means to love Allah more than anything else. And Allah attached Surah At-Tawbah, the Prophet, and striving for their sake. And the reason is that you don't know anything about Allah without a message, right? You can't observe your way to the truth. You can't rationalize your way to the truth. It has to be given to you through a message. And then if you do love it, then you actually you got to work to preserve it. And that's where the striving for Allah's sake has to come before everything else. I like to liken this to a building, right? Like we're having this talk right now. The top priority of this live stream can't actually be the question to the guest. It's got to be electricity, right? The top priority, even though we may not think about it too much, but in reality, the top priority of this live stream is A, electricity, B, time, C, the tech. Otherwise, we don't have a live stream. Then after all that's taken care of, only then can you enjoy the conversation with a guest, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the human being. We have to build this stuff up, the spiritual
Foundation.
infrastructure, where your heart is regularly filled with the mention and the belief in your Creator. Now, let's go to your conclusion. What is the conclusion like in your book?
So the conclusion is that Islam is a valid cure to the poison that is nihilism. And then I go through basically everything in terms of what has been outlined in the book, and show how Islam is an antidote to all of these things. So the idea of, the issue with knowledge, the issue with ethics, the issues with, the existential and cosmological meaning and everything. When you're reading the book, the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear that He has not made these things in jest, that the universe has been created and you have been created with a purpose, and how to fulfill that and what to do and how to protect yourself from certain evils. And people sort of, they think in this sense of meaninglessness that they should just go out into the world and just enjoy it, YOLO, that kind of stuff. But that is not the antidote that they think they're going to find. Whereas with Islam, because that kind of life ends up being more of a roller coaster. Because people are trying to attain like the peaks. They're trying to get the highs and they're trying to get the rush, but there's always a drop. There's always they're called peaks for a reason. When you get to the top, there's the only way to go from there is down. And the higher you go, the further you can fall. And so once you go down, everything then is about trying to get to that peak again. Whereas Islam is more about learning to be content. There are ups and downs, but rather than trying to search for these high peaks, it's more flat. And there's a joy that comes out of that. There is a pleasure. There is a sense of peace and tranquility, with not constantly chasing these things and not being attached to the highs and not pushing away the downs, but being someone who submits. The root of Muslim is the one who submits to the will of Allah. And there's the hadith as well that sort of encapsulates this, that everything is good for the believer. Everything is good for the believer. If a good befalls him, he is thankful and he says, Alhamdulillah. And so it is good for him. And if bad or hardship hits him, he is patient and he submits. And so it is good for him. And this really encapsulates, I think, generally the antidote, which is Islam in particular. Not just because it offers these things, because people would argue, I guess, that things like worship or moving away from the dunya, these kind of things, you can find them in other religions. But the other point I tried to make is that Islam also makes sense in terms of Tawheed. It doesn't suffer from the same issues as Trinitarianism or polytheism, for example. With the conception of Isa alayhi salam, it's not a contradictory one, or it's not an unfavorable one or an unjustified one, like with the Jews or with the Christians. It's a complete package. Not only does it offer spiritual medicine, but it's also rational. It makes sense. It's practical. It's, you know, it offers you a shield from things. You know, in the same way, for example, like people, they talk about these restrictions. They're like, you know, they see Islam sometimes just a list of do's and don'ts. And they're like, there's so many rules, there's so many rules. It's so restrictive. And then they think because there are rules and because there are these restrictions, that somehow means that every Muslim is going to be a copy paste of each other. Everyone's just going to be identical because we're Muslim and we have to follow this strict list of rules. But it doesn't follow from that you become identical. So you look at the Muslim community and they're very different, despite all following the rules. In the same way that, you know, chess is very strict. Each piece has got a couple of things you can do with it. It doesn't really go beyond that. But every game is completely unique, despite the fact that
it's a great
has
example.
Very strict ruling.
Every sport's like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you have these strict rules, but every game is different. It's not going to be the same. And so these rules, they're there to protect you. And in the same way, for example, you're like, we've got children. They're not big thinkers. They don't transcend the immediate. It's like, you know, they eat candy, they eat chocolate, ice cream, and it's like, oh, it's tasty. That means it's good. So I want it. Give me more. I'll just live on this, please. Thank you. It's amazing. And you give them broccoli or sprouts or carrots or something good for them, and they're like, yuck. This is disgusting. It doesn't feel nice. It doesn't taste nice. Therefore, I don't want it. Don't give me that ever. And trying to explain to like a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, like, no, we can't just have you live on candy or chocolate or sweets or ice cream. You can have a little bit every now and then, but you've got to have a limited amount. And I know you don't like your carrots and your vegetables and your peas and your broccoli, but you have to eat it because there's goodness in it. And they're like, why? Why can't I eat? And it's why? What do you mean it's bad? I taste it and it's good. It's pleasure. You know, I feel nice. And then even if you were trying to explain to them, well, you know, if you eat too much, you might get diabetes, your leg might fall off, this, that, the other, you could become obese. They don't. They eat it and they're like, well, my legs haven't fallen off. I don't have diabetes, and I eat it again. Oh, look, you know, I only get goodness out of this. I only feel pleasure. Where is this disease? Where is this badness that you talk of? I don't see it. And every time they eat it, because its effects are slow and they're creeping. It takes a while for it to take its impact. So they don't see it. And in the same way, it's like, where's the goodness? I eat the broccoli and it just tastes bad. Where's this goodness? I don't see it.
No immediate goodness.
Exactly. And when we get bigger and we become older, we're still sort of like that.
Yeah.
Like we still, like maybe our sphere of consideration gets a little bit bigger, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not all encompassing. And so in the same way, you know, people, they get bigger, and you hear this a lot in modern political discourse. It's like, what's the harm? It's not hurting anyone. Why can't this person just commit zina? Why can't this person just practice this or that or the other? It's not harming anyone. But implicit in that claim is that they've drawn a line around the experience. They only think so far, and they're not thinking about how these things have a huge impact on society, how underlying these acts are certain assumptions that, you know, that do have huge impacts on a society, not just immediately, not just in a couple of years, but over generations. And, you know, a really good example of that, for example, is the birth rates.
Yeah.
You just like Korea being a massive sort of example of where things can go wrong. That if a society is built and its economy is built on this idea of constant growth, and like you're only going to have financial growth or financial success if there is supply and demand, and that supply and demand comes from people. And Korea in particular has a birth rate, I think, of 0.7, which means in one generation they're going to more than half.
Wow, that's insane.
Which is really crazy. And
then what's their immigration?
They don't really have it. They've got a little bit of an immigration, but it's not huge. They're quite it's a word, Aryan. Like, so they only really marry and reproduce within their own race. They don't really extend beyond that. I think it's something like 90% or more of Koreans will only marry another Korean. But then as well as that, they're just choosing not to have children. You've got the introduction of the dual income family. People keep putting it off. They're like, oh, I'll have a child much later on. Or how can I bring a child into this world and get towards this? They're either anti-natalists or they'll just put it off beyond where it's reasonable. Women, when they get to the age of 30, it sounds horrible, but births are referred to as geriatric births at that point.
Wow.
They've used up over 80% of their eggs, I think, maybe 90%. It becomes much harder to have children. And even if you do, there's much greater risks. And people are they're so obsessed with freedom now, they don't want children, but then they're not seeing that the long-term consequences of this could be huge, because the society itself transforms. It goes from being bottom heavy. What I mean by that is that you have more young than you do elderly, and the young support the elderly, and it's easy for them to do so because there's so many of them. So if you've got like a family, mum and dad have 7 children, it's much easier for 7 children to look after mum and dad.
Very easy.
When they split the burden between themselves. But if you have one child looking after mum and dad, it's incredibly difficult, because now this one child has got to look after 2 people. And not just that, if mum and dad's brothers and sisters, your aunties and uncles, didn't have any children, now the burden on you is to look after not just your own parents, but the childless in your family.
It's an inverted pyramid.
Yes. And this becomes a huge burden on the younger. And this is why in places like Japan now, they're talking about things like euthanasia as a solution to this.
Yep.
And the other issue is that if your economy is based on supply and demand, and you lose people, think about house prices. Why are house prices so expensive? What is it that makes them cost so much? It's because you have more buyers than you have sellers. There's more people. Maybe one house goes up for sale and there's 10 or 20 people fighting to buy that house. Because there's more buyers than there are sellers, the competition is on the buyer. Yeah. And it's the house will cost as much as the highest bidder is willing to pay. If someone's willing to pay £1 million, that house costs £1 million. But if you've got a shrinking population, because the housing market as well, we're saying we've not got enough houses. We need to build more. But that's only going to work if the population continues to increase.
Correct. If there are no buyers, eventually everything's going to dip, including innovation. There's no reason to innovate.
Yes. And so what happens is that eventually, if, like, for example, in Korea, if they're struggling for houses, that's not going to be the case for much longer. If they keep building, it's completely pointless. Why? Because in a generation, their population will literally halve.
Insane.
If it was one, for every 2 people, there was 1 child. If you've got 100 people in generation 1, you've only got 50 in generation 2.
Crazy.
And so there's a huge decrease. It's even less than that. So out of every, if you've got 1,000 people, what's a better way of saying it? If you've got whatever it is, it's less.
If you got 100 so let's say you have a population of 10 million people. You're going to go down not to 5 million people. That's half.
You're going to go much less.
You're going to go less, like almost 4 million people, right?
Yes. And it's exponential.
That's crazy.
Because if that pattern continues, and it's not to say that it will, because inshallah, Islam, will take hold, or traditional values will take hold, and they'll move away from the thinking that they have at the moment towards something that entices them towards having children. The issue is that the values that they have, which are like the popular Western liberal secular, they don't motivate people to want to have children. Why? Because people are obsessed with freedom. We were talking about Pinocchio before. This idea to be free of tyranny, to be away from the clutches of tradition, the rules, the regulations. We don't want that. We just want to be free. And having children is a sacrifice of your time, your energy, and your effort. And if you have children, you don't have the freedom you had before that. And anyone who's a parent knows this. There's a saying, I can't remember who said it, but the greatest tragedy is the unlived lives of the parents. Someone once said. It's because once you have children, your life is no longer your own. Your resources are no longer your own. Your time is no longer your own. You're constantly having to take into consideration these other human beings. And for someone who values freedom more than anything else, sacrifice off that freedom is seen as a bad. You were talking about the value hierarchy. What is it that the Western are constantly talking about? Like, even when they went to war with the Middle East, when they went to war with the Muslims, what did they say? What did George Bush say? They hate our freedoms. They hate everything for them is framed around this notion of freedom, liberty. You live in the United States. It's, you've got the Statue of Liberty. Everyone's going on about liberty, and that's what they've been exporting. With secularism, they've been exporting liberty and democracy across the world. And what we're seeing now is the consequences of that. What we're seeing now is that no one wants children anymore because it takes their liberties away, and you can't convince them of that. And when their parents get older, they don't want to look after them. Why? Because it takes their liberty away. So they'll throw them away into one old people's homes, or they'll try to motivate them, like you see in certain parts of Europe. Is it Denmark or Holland? I can't remember where. In Japan, where suicide is a huge problem. They're motivating people. They're saying, you've become a burden. You might as well end your life. But they think it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And they will feel the negative consequences of it. And so when people say, oh, what's the harm? It's not harming anyone. The thing is these practices, many of the practices that are forbidden, they lead either, like if we're taking into consideration a certain community, what is entailed in that is not procreation. Yeah. And I don't know to what degree you're in the US. I'm guessing you've got freedom of speech. So
we do. It's literal extinction is the result.
Yes.
Literal
for this
extinction.
Community, they're not going to procreate. They're not going to increase the population. So for that particular group, there's a small community of them that might do, but it's not common. Yeah, where they may engage in some sort of scientific endeavor to have a baby implanted within them, or they may adopt, but it's not the majority. Yeah, it's a tiny percentage of them. And then when you look at zina, what is the most common outcome of zina? Well, most of zina, they will use contraception. Yeah, they're not most of zina, most extramarital engagements between people does not lead to children because they use condoms, the morning after pill, abortion. And if for whatever reason a child manages to survive these obstacles and come into being, there's still the option of giving them up for adoption. And if for whatever reason, or abortion, even in later stages. And if for whatever reason a child manages to survive all of these obstacles, they'll maybe have one child, recognize how difficult it is, recognize how much of a sacrifice it is, maybe try to pile that off on grandma or granddad or babysitters or this, that, and the other, on the schooling system, so that they can gain as much freedom as possible back. But a lot of them will say, I'm never having another kid.
Yep.
Which is why the average is 1 point something generally. Yeah, because a lot of people will have one kid, they'll recognize how much of a sacrifice it is, and then they won't bother to have another. And then you'll have a few that'll have many. And if you look in places like the UK and the US as well, the conversation is constantly about immigration. Like in the UK, for example, we had Brexit. The whole thing about Brexit was centered around this idea of immigration. And we're in a bit of a predicament because our economy is dependent upon growth, but our population is refusing to have children. And I think we average about 1.6, 1.7, so it's a lot higher than it is in Korea. But I think the only reason it's that high at all is because of immigration, because we have immigrant families that come here and have lots of children. And the people are not taking into consideration, but they'll complain about it. They say, all the Muslims are coming over, they're going to outpopulate us. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's a two-part problem, isn't it? One part of that problem, or they see it as a problem, the Muslims don't. One part of the problem is that, yes, Muslims have lots of children. Immigrants have lots of children. People that come from traditional family backgrounds have lots of children. But another part of that problem is you're not having children.
Yeah.
Even if immigration didn't come and the Muslims didn't arrive in your shores, you would still have the same problem. You would still be shrinking.
Yeah.
You would still require something. Yeah. And the other issue is people don't want to do a lot of the jobs that immigrants will do.
Yep.
When Brexit happened, we had a huge problem. People weren't going into the fields picking strawberries anymore.
Yep.
We ran out of lorry drivers because most of them are Polish. And there's a lot of jobs that the indigenous population are not willing to do because they see themselves as too good for that job.
Yeah.
They see themselves as too good for that job. Whereas someone from a foreign background, that with the standard of living back home is much less, they're willing to live in lesser conditions, worse conditions. So like the Polish, for example, a lot of my family would come here and they wouldn't care. They'd share a house with 10 lads.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they would live like 5 men to a room with a mattress on the floor, and they'd just make do with a bottle of vodka and a couple of Polish sausages, and they'd send most of the money back home, and the family would build a mansion, and then they go back and live like kings.
Yeah.
They're willing to do that because the standard of living is different for them. Whereas, like in Britain, you watch some of the news posts about poverty in the UK, and wallahi, you'll be surprised to see. And I don't know if you've got the same phenomenon in the US. I don't really watch US news too much, but you'll have people complaining about poverty, and they'll be wearing Gucci glasses. They'll
Crazy.
have a flat screen TV behind them. They'll have the latest iPhone in their hand. They'll be smoking. They'll drink alcohol, and they're crying poverty. And it's like, what you're not poor until you have to sell your phone and your TV, and you've got none of this, and you're destitute, and you've got holes in your clothes, and you're like, I've got nothing else to sell. I've got nothing else. But they still feel poor, despite having all of these things, despite getting as much money as they get from the government in assistance, in order to be able to live that lifestyle, even without having work, even without having a job. And at the same time, they're complaining about the immigrants doing this and doing that.
Yep.
You're digging your own hole. The only reason we have any immigration is because we need people doing certain jobs.
Yeah.
That you're not willing to do. We need people paying taxes. We need people doing this. We need people doing that. And the economy is based of supply and demand. And you are so obsessed with freedom and liberty to your own detriment. And now, we've got this sort of conveyor belt government where once every 4 years it changes, or however long it is. I'm not that into politics, but it's like we change the government every now and then, and the government's job is just to sort of maintain themselves while they're in power. They don't want to look like the bad ones. They don't want to look like the cause of the collapse.
Yeah.
And they have a problem. They can't tell people to make sacrifices because they're not that. The second you say that, you're not getting in power. They're not going to vote you in.
Yeah.
But they want to, and this is one of the issues with democracy, is that they want to hear what they want to hear. And if you say anything other than that, what they want, they're not going to bring you in.
Yeah.
And at the moment, what people want is leisure and liberty. Leisure and liberty. And they don't want anything else. And this is a huge problem because this can't go anywhere.
You're not going to survive.
Exactly. And in the long run, we're kicking our own feet from under us.
A people who don't want to do hard work and don't want to produce kids, what do they bring into the earth? Naturally, the way of the world is going to dismiss them. They're going to be dismissed. Either they're going to be replaced within their own country, or if they don't bring in those immigrants who want to do those two things, their country is going to collapse into extreme poverty, like the way Greece was, the way Romania is, the way most countries in South America are. So if you're not going to do hard work and you're not going to produce kids, then what have you brought to the world?
Yeah.
Right. Like you can see people who don't have hard work, but they have kids. There's a lot of countries like that, right? Those countries move on, right? But if you don't have both, if you have neither, our analysis of that is Shaitan has made you love what brings about your end.
Yes.
Literally, you are finished.
Yes. And this is one of the beauties of Islam as well, is that in Islam are the keys to success. Yeah. In Islam, there is a commitment to the Sharia. Yeah. And there's no curtailing it. There's no like picking and choosing. There's no pick and mix law. Yeah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger have commanded, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way we organize as a society. And if we abide by that, we will have victory, even if we do nothing other than just have children. Yeah. That eventually our numbers will grow. And we're growing not just because of birth rates, we're also growing, and Pew Research is testament to this, because of reversion, because people are becoming Muslim. And I think the main reason is because people are having experiences like myself. They're looking at their world and they're seeing this sort of obsession, this naive, childish obsession with liberty and freedom in the same way that we did when we were teenagers. We're like, just let us do what we want. Anyone that tries to tell us otherwise is a tyrant. Yeah.
It's continued on into adult life, essentially.
Yeah. And eventually, what you have is just a society of very large children, because
Yeah.
it's not just that. Yeah, we're extending childhood.
Yeah.
Historically, men became men the second they became men. Like this,
Mm-hmm.
like once you hit puberty, it's like right, off to the mines,
Yep.
off to the factories. Like you got to start earning an income. You're a man now, yeah.
Yeah.
And in the UK in particular, you'd have your first pint. They'd take you to the pub, and you'd be treated like an adult. And what we have now with the introduction of the education system that's compulsory is you've got a bunch of people learning a lot of stuff that the majority of which they're never going to make use of.
Mm-hmm.
Because the idea here isn't necessarily about the majority of people. It's that if we just get everyone doing this, we'll get the cream of the crop. The rest of them have just wasted all of their time, and they're just going to be drones doing this, that, and the other. But we can pick from them the next scientist, the next this, next that, and then that's going to massively increase our technological output and so on and so forth, which will increase what? Our liberty and our leisure time.
Yeah.
Our comfort. You know, we get the things that we want. The dunya, the dunya, the dunya.
Yeah.
That's their focus. But the problem with this is that because the world has become so complex, because the technological advancements have become so crazy that you can't just rely on people doing this of their own will.
Yeah.
You have to make that education compulsory.
Mm-hmm.
And you need a higher educated populace in mass in order to make up for the more complex working environment.
Mm-hmm.
And if this isn't in place, you can't keep up with all of that advancement that you want. So they've introduced it as compulsory. But the issue with this is this increases how long you're dependent for.
Yeah.
It's not coincidental, for example, that the age of consent happens to coincide generally with the end of your education. Why is that? It's not got anything to do with reproduction, because they're teaching us in the schooling system that this is completely normal. You're still going to want to do these things. Here's how you use a condom. Here's how you use contraception. They were teaching me this when I was 10. Yeah, like when they were showing us videos of this weird naked family that walked around, and they were like, masturbation is completely normal. This is completely, and they're teaching you about sexual education from a very early age, because they know you're going to start getting interested in this. And that's even why they separate the primary school students from the high school students. And it's around the age of puberty. That's the cutoff point between these two different, because they know these are children and these are not children. You have the invention of the teenager. Yeah. And this invention of the teenager is essentially us treating adults as children.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got this way of sort of keeping them dependent, and we're not really training them to become adults in this period.
Yeah.
When they should be learning how to become independent, we're beating them down with a stick and telling them, no, you're still kids. No, you're still kids. No, you're still kids. And what happens is that's what they're learning to be. They're learning to be children.
Yeah.
And so when they leave that education system, we have this problem where now we've just trained an army of adult children. And you see this everywhere you go. And you know the saying, there's the cycle, a weak society, hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. And we're in that stage now where we've got good times and we're making weak men. And what we mean by weak men is childish men, children, soft people that can't deal with hardship, don't want anything to do with it, don't know what real problems are. So that if their phone backs up, or if it crashes or their internet speed slows down, they go into a panic. How am I going to deal with this? If there's someone, like we've seen these videos where the women are being attacked by men, and the men in the society don't do nothing about it. They run off. Yeah, why is that? Because we're raising weaklings. We're raising people that are soft, that are accustomed to leisure, to pleasure, to lack of sacrifice, to liberty. Yeah, they don't want to do things that might take that away from them. And if you get injured in a fight, like your freedoms are limited. So like this is what people are obsessed with right now. But it is going to undermine itself. And if we, the Muslims, can stick to the Quran and the Sunnah, if we can follow Allah's religion, Allah will grant us success. And you could see how that trickles and how that will happen. And I think a lot of people, they're becoming disenfranchised with modern Western secular liberalism, because they're seeing this. They're seeing that this is just nonsense. This is crap. This doesn't lead to victory. This isn't going to get us anywhere. And in Islam, you have victory in this world and in the next. If you follow it, that you're not going to be obsessed with the highs, and you're not going to have to suffer through the lows. That everything is going to become a source of pleasure or a source of comfort to you, whether it's good, whether it's bad. In hardship, there's a like a bitter sweetness to it. Anyone who's sincere in their belief will feel this, that they know Allah is testing them, and that there is goodness in it. Allah is forgiving my sins. Allah is purifying me,
preparing you for a greater future.
Yes, exactly. And you look at the Palestinians as a perfect example of this. That beautiful brother who lost his grandchild, and like his face. So I couldn't imagine going through what he was going through, and looking so in control of himself. I'd have been pathetic.
SubhanAllah.
I'd have broken down in tears. And that was a rajul, that was a man, who was able to control his emotions in some of the harshest of circumstances and inspire millions of people around the world who were lucky enough to witness this man in action in an organic, natural moment when the death of a child in his hands, and closing her eyes and kissing her. SubhanAllah, like this is the consequence of iman, of belief, of Islam, what it does to those who embody it and who absorb its teachings into their heart.
And there's an amazing poet who says, give deprivation its due and find intimacy with it. Because deprivation, it's like a location that Allah put you, right? It's like a state that Allah puts you in. There's a reason he put you in there. Give it its due, and you'll see the fruit come out later on of deprivation. And I think when I look at the things that are necessary, I don't think that there's any motivation other than belief, right? So getting off of intoxicants, getting married, sacrificing all this stuff that you could be doing, having children, more sacrifice on top of that, and then taking care of your children, because some people have children and they bounce, right? They can't take it anymore and they leave. So I don't see that anybody can get through this except that they have a modicum of iman and belief that this is what's right, and that Allah will guarantee me that I'm not going to regret this, and that I'm actually one day going to look back and say this was far better than living the single life. And there has to be someone that Allah puts around you to compare against, right?
Yes.
So we do know people who are living, let's say not unmarried, because Muslims can't go on like that, but let's say married, and then they're just living like kids with not having kids, like living like teenagers or young adults, just crisscrossing the world, having a blast, right? Saving their money, all that. And it seems to me like they're doing stuff that we can't do. But then again, let's fast forward in a few years when you're 40 and you're 50 and that doesn't look right anymore. And it doesn't, and you've seen everywhere in the world. Like, what else is there to do? When you hit 50 and 60, right?
Yes.
What else is there to do, right? Except share your experience now with the next generation of your kids. So who's happier, the 65-year-old who's got 5 grandkids and 4 kids, or the 65-year-old that's just alone with his 65-year-old spouse? Right?
Yeah, and there's a couple of other things we could probably talk about as well, because there is an issue in that sort of forever young mentality that couples have. In that, as people get older, and I know it's a horrible thing to sort of make mention to or draw the light to, but as people get older, men and women develop differently in age. And I've heard this, and this is something that women specifically have said to me on numerous occasions, that as men get older, they become more attractive, or they become more desirable. And as women get older, they don't necessarily follow that same trajectory. And for this couple that are sort of in this forever young mentality, eventually what happens is women hit menopause and things like that. And there's all these sort of difficulties and things. And if there's not some sort of structure there to protect them, if there's not something there for them in terms of children, you see this a lot, especially like and it's not in every case, there's always exceptions to the rules. But the couples who are like, I'm never going to have children. I'm never going to have children. When they get old, there's not really much joining them anymore.
Yeah.
And so divorce rates, especially in like secular environments, can be quite high as a result of this, because children are like a glue between people.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you love someone not just because they're beautiful or because they're young or because they're fun or because they're this, but because they are the mother of your children. That you have been bonded by blood. That there is something special about these people now because of the fact that you have this connection through others, through a family. And when you get older, even if things don't work out for whatever reason, you've got comfort. And one of my favorite du'as to make for people is, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you many children and many grandchildren that will be a sweetness in your old age, that, even if one or two of them are crap, there's still plenty of them that will come visit you and spend time with you and not just pie you off into an old people's home.
That's the value of having a lot of kids, because the chances now of having a good one is now much higher because and also when you have one kid, even let's say you had two kids, right? Once you have two kids, there's still a lot of pressure on the kids. Secondly, they don't develop as good as when they have 3-4 siblings, right? Reason being is that every sibling is different. You're going to learn to deal with now your mom, your dad, and let's say 2 or 3 or 4 siblings. You're going to deal with 6 different personalities, right? Yep. This person is going to be far better adjusted when he goes into the world.
Yes.
And I can't imagine the China policy, one child, Chinese China policy. Of course, I think they stopped it. But who is that kid going to relate to? Has he ever shared his toys?
Yeah. Did you ever refer to any of your friends that were only child as having only child syndrome?
Oh, they're odd, right?
Yeah, there's something different about only child.
Yeah,
like they find it much more difficult to share. They generally tend to want to be the sort of center of attention. It causes, because they don't have to share their research. When growing up as an only child, you don't have to. You're not getting hand-me-downs. You don't have to share things with other kids. You don't have to learn these sort of like negative experiences that you get in a brother-sister, brother-brother, blah 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 relationship, where you got to get into fights and you got to learn to forgive. Like, there's a completely different dynamic. Like, the only child it generally can be quite spoiled. All of the resources just get spent on them. The parents don't really have to think about, if I get this kid that, then I'll have to get them that as well. Otherwise, they'll feel left out. The parents, there's a different mechanism that goes on here. So the children tend to be quite different when they come, and it's not every child. Again, there's exceptions to the rule, but especially in like secular environments, there's something.
Yeah, the only child, I think you're oppressing them. Really, it's a type of oppression, because that kid
if it's by choice specifically as well, where like you're choosing not to have any more children after you've had one. Not if it's obviously if it's not your choice and for whatever reason you're trying and you can't have it, it's a completely different kettle of fish. But even then, I think the kind of characteristics that you find in the parents that are like that, the ones who want more children but can't have it, are probably going to be mindful of only child syndrome, whereas those who just choose not to, that it's not something that's necessarily going to be crossing their mind.
100%. Keep expanding on this point. Eddie, come sit in my place. I need to get up for 2 seconds. I'll be right back. But keep expanding on that point.
No problem.
You're now our
hello, Eddie.
I'll be right back.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah.
You're Eddie. Nice to meet you, Eddie. So, are you? Have you had this experience with only children or only, single children?
I just
families?
walked into this conversation, so what's going on?
Basically, we're talking at the moment about the characteristics that certain people have when they come out of an only child environment, and the distinctions or the kind of characteristics that someone might learn having to grow up with siblings, brothers and sisters that you've got to compete with, maybe fall out with, learn to forgive, etc. So are you familiar? Do you have brothers and sisters, or?
I have 3 brothers, so I understand the aspect of like competition. So I can definitely see when there's only one child in the family, it's definitely like they don't grow up with any competition, any sort of like especially if it's like a brother, like a boy, and you know they don't have a sister. You know, they don't learn to how to respect women as they grow up. You know, if the parents aren't there, obviously.
Yeah, there's a lot in the sibling relationships that help with social interactions. So when you become an adult as well, and you go out into the adult world, and you've got to start interacting with other people that are not mum and dad, like those who just haven't had that practice necessarily in their youth can find it very difficult sort of growing up. But it's yeah, there was a lot of different things that this was sort of trailing off, and if you weren't there for it, I don't know where we could necessarily take the conversation without confusing you.
No. I understand what's going on though. So, but it's very, very important to have, you know, multiple children when it comes to being married. So,
and I guess the major point, sort of linking back to where we came from in order to get to this, was how Islam in particular will give those who practice it victory. Oh, he's leaving.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Assalamu alaikum.
What were you saying?
I was just talking. I was bringing it back to the original point about how Islam will give victory to the Muslims, to the believers, and that essentially the secular liberalism is going to undermine itself, and it sort of drives the need for immigration, because if the indigenous population are not willing to have children and they're not willing to do the jobs, and the economy is dependent upon a healthy growth in population, or at least an attempt to sustain the population, and the population itself isn't willing to do that, and the system of power is itself built in such a way so that it motivates only bringing people into power that will just pat the population on its back for its current actions, for the things that it denies and the things that it wants, that it's not going to offer itself the cure through that system, and that they will have to think of other ways. And this is why when you're looking at like who is it that brings in, and it's funny, the weird thing is the immigration or the anti-immigration is generally like a right-wing talking point, but it's usually right-wing capitalists that spend most of their money hiring foreign workers.
Yeah, to save money.
Yeah, because capitalistically speaking, you're going to get more profit. You're going to get more bang for your buck. And so there's this weird sort of cognitive dissonance that occurs there. And they are the ones that bring in the immigration. So despite Brexit happening, despite the whole point of Brexit being centered on immigration never stopped. Yeah, we still have it coming in. Why? Because there's a sort of necessity for it. And if we don't have it, they can foresee that there will be a type of financial collapse. And it scares the disbeliever because their obsession is with the dunya. Now, this idea of overpopulation as well is another interesting topic, because I don't think we are overpopulated. We have this weird way of communing, of like centering ourselves in cities. And I don't know if anyone's ever zoomed out or looked at Earth on Google Maps where you zoom out. What's mad is how the cities disappear. It kind of looks like there is no concrete. It's like, wow, this is really green. Like there's so much earth. But we've got this obsession with convenience and like having everything really, really close. And so we pile into these cities and it's unnecessary. And we have this very high standard of living, which requires a lot of resources. Like people that live in tribes in Africa, their turnover of resources isn't that high. And if you look, and you know, in terms of like the landfill or waste that comes from these communities, like they're very obsessed with reusing things. Like an animal, for example, there's no waste. Like they eat all the organs, they eat everything that comes out of the animal. They utilize the bones to make tools and to do this and to that. Like everything is sort of recycled, and there's not much waste, so it's very sustainable, and that's livable. Like there is a lot of land. We could spread out, and we could choose to live more humble lifestyles with less. And you know, but we've become sort of indoctrinated from a very early age to have a certain standard of living, to the degree now that if someone takes away your internet, it's like you feel as if your human rights have been violated. And there's nothing necessary or compulsory about having to be provided with an
with all these luxuries. And how about Hajj Hajj as a little bit of a wake-up call. When I went to Hajj, it was 1994, the first time. And it was the first time you see face-to-face for long periods of time very poor people, right? And it was the first time where you had to live like a very poor person. And Hajj, back in the day, more than today, there's Wi-Fi in Mina, and there's data in Mina, right? I mean, your data is going to work, your phone's going to work. But there were the idea of Mina is you're spending 3 days literally cut off from everything, but not cut off from everything in a nice, comfortable tent in the woods. Cut off from everything with another million people around you.
Yeah.
Right. And if you go through that experience once, all of a sudden it's like it pulls your perspective down, your standards.
Do you mind if I just nip to the toilet quickly?
Yeah, go ahead. Because I just did the same thing.
There's a few really interesting points I want to bring up.
No problem. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. And I'm gonna while he's taking a breather, I'm gonna say something that why don't we in our education, they give sex ed, they never give family ed, right? Is there a concept of they give sex ed to in these schools and they show you how to do all this stuff, but do they show you how to take care of a kid? Do they talk about the non-physical aspects of taking care of a kid? Like, how much does a kid need a mom? How much does he need a dad? Like, what is the role of a dad? Like, why is that not organized? Why is everything organized in an equation in every secular subject? It's perfectly organized. Yet we believe that the family unit is something that has no organization. Nobody could touch it. You're telling me that there isn't a right way to give a kid a stable life after all these centuries of human existence. We haven't come down with a formula, a very basic formula of what produces a well-adjusted, emotionally and mentally and physically stable and healthy human being. Think about that, right? It's because they don't want to. They don't want to discuss this. Because once you do have this, it really takes power away from the government. Family power always takes away from governmental power, right? And if you have a government that, if you have kids who don't have dads, who don't have moms, who don't have tribes, who don't have little clans, they become dependent on whom? That power, that dependency shifts to the government. They don't. You have to convince me otherwise. They don't want strong families to bond with other strong families. Then you have a very strong town, right? That can resist.
They also make it very easy to like obtain EBT, things like that. But they don't.
EBT?
Yeah, they're very.
Which is?
Food stamps.
Food stamps. Okay, yeah.
So they're very quick to fund into food stamps, but not fund maybe family, sort of organizations.
Yeah.
Things to actually strengthen the family. That. Inshallah, one day can, make you not end up using food stamps.
I mean, how many civilizations has the earth seen? Okay. You look at all the successful civilizations. Don't look at them at the top. Look at them on the way up. On the way up, what was the family structure of this civilization like? That produced the human beings who took you to the top. Now, how does a civilization get to the top? Human beings take you there, right? Men take you there to the top. In the history of the Roman Empire, the Greeks, the Persians, the Egyptians, go on and on and on and on. Okay, the Ottomans, every empire that we're talking about, there was a time when they were going up. I want to know what. Okay, you're back. No, did you hear what I was saying?
I didn't.
Let me say it again. I was saying that you talked about sex ed, but there's no course in these schools that talk about how to raise a kid. And how is it that after all these centuries of life, we haven't reached a basic formula on what produces an emotionally, mentally, and physically stable child?
They're not interested in it at all.
Yeah, because it takes power away from the government.
What is most, tell me if it's similar in the US, but the majority of my education in the UK was focused on the sciences. Mm-hmm. That was it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily like how to be an adult, how to be a father, how to be a brother, how to be a friend, there was no focus. But when you leave, how do you do bills? How do you adult? When you're out there, how do you become an independent person?
Yeah.
How do you stop being dependent upon the state and upon your family? There's just this strange obsession with physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, ICT, history, but a very particular history. Generally,
Mhm.
World War One, World War Two, and that's about it. And then like that's it. What like food dead? And,
Yeah.
um,
How about
and then
this?
that becomes optional.
How about this? Name 10 great civilizations, 10 people, 10 nations who have reached the pinnacle of civilization in their time, right? Now, what I said when you were gone is I don't want to see how they behaved when they reached the top, okay? Because that's usually when they start indulging. I want to see what was their family structure like on the way to the top. Right?
Yeah.
The guys who took them to the top, how were they raised? What was their family structure like? Guaranteed they were physically and emotionally and mentally stabilized.
Yes.
Otherwise, they can't reach the top, right?
Yes.
How were they stabilized? That's what we want to see. And we can't tell me that we as a society, which so advanced, haven't discovered a simple formula, a high percentage formula on what produces the best type of human being in a home, right? Like the idea of having a mom, have a dad, they're there. I have memories. I have childhood. I didn't move too much. All that stuff.
Yeah. What's funny as well is the data is very clear that
Yeah.
like the nuclear family does produce great results. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's controversial to say that
Yeah.
dual income families cause problems. That families become strangers to each other because mum and dad are both working full-time jobs, and then when they both get home, there's another full-time job waiting for them to debate about
Yep.
who's going to be doing what. And because they're too busy debating about whose turn it is to do the dishes or to watch the kids or to wash the clothes, they become stressed. They feel overworked, over encumbered. They're not really spending much time with the kids because they've offloaded that to a school with people that don't know the kids personally and not really interested in them. So people are being raised by strangers
Yep.
according to a government curriculum that's not really interested on them as individuals, but more on economic growth towards this particular, capitalistic end.
Vision.
And
Yep.
it's just bizarre. Like you've got this very strange family unit where people don't really know each other. There's no one sitting at the dinner table. We don't even know our neighbors. Like how many people can honestly say they know the names of the people next door to them, let alone 5, 10 doors down? We've got these strange cases where someone would die and no one knows for months. I had a friend who worked as an industrial cleaner, and some of the jobs he used to be sent to were these horrible cases where an old woman would just pass away and no one would know.
Insane.
No one would know for months. And then
Insane.
she would just become rotten, and like they'd have to come and clean the walls or the carpets or remove all of this stuff. Horrible accounts of things.
What would happen if somebody came out and said, I'm going to be doing a study and teaching a course on how to have a family, right? And that this should be taught, let's forget public schools, in Muslim schools, in masajid, how to have a family. How controversial would that be?
Very,
and yet, isn't this like the root of all it's the foundation that we shouldn't even be thinking about?
Yeah, well, part of the controversy is that many Muslims have been sucked into the secular liberal lifestyle, double income families, this obsession with liberty and freedom and leisure. And so if you were to even do that in a Muslim setting, there's bound to be controversy because it's going to be too traditional.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you mean, having a stay-at-home mother looking after kids and, the person that loves and cares for them the most being center in their growth and education at an early age? How bizarre are you? But this is the thing. It's like we've got this age of socially awkward individuals because everyone's communication is sort of centered on the internet. Like face-to-face is difficult, and people find people that are good at face-to-face interactions strange. Like it's like, wow, I've never met someone like you that can hold a conversation and is fine with awkward silences. How bizarre. Like, what do we do? And but a lot of this is the consequence of like a healthy upbringing. And so like for me in particular, so I had not the greatest father, but I had a brilliant mother. And I had a great relationship with my brother and my sister. And we had a grandmother who, she was a bit crazy. She suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, but she was there. She helped. and like we were together. We had good relationships with each other, and we lived in a different age where like computers was Sega and the Super Nintendo, and you got bored of them quite quickly, and you went out and you played with sticks, and you made dens in the mud. But
Yeah.
like it was a different age where you were forced socialization, and now we don't really have that. Yeah, it's been taken away. When people talk about how many friends you have, they mean how many people have accepted this
Yeah.
digital request for friendship.
Yeah.
And it's just we're living in a very, very strange world at the moment. And the Muslims
even if someone was addicted to that stuff, I find that if they lived in a home with 5 other people, the people by necessity would break up some of your awkwardness. It's like when when someone's online, there's a certain repetitive vibe that they're in. As soon as you go in the hallway, in the kitchen, in the living room, and there's 4 or 5 other people, it by necessity breaks it up, right?
Yeah.
It's like a medicine.
So
It's a medicine to
but
be online.
It depends on the person as well, because this is like where the will comes in, I guess, to a certain degree. In that, how does that develop, and the chaotic nature of different people. So like that might work in one group setting with 5 kind of individuals, but it might not work in a different setting with other individuals. People who are not necessarily patient, understanding. Like for example, like I'm good with strange people because I overlook their strangeness. So sometimes, and you get a lot of them, like you'll just have this odd person who will come up to you. Maybe they're socially awkward, maybe they've got mental health issues, and they'll just start talking to you. And I'll just talk to them back. Like I don't make it apparent that it's awkward or that it's strange. And if they ask strange questions, I'll go, "Oh, I don't know." I'll just treat it as if it's a normal situation. And I got this off my mum quite a bit. She was a manager in a restaurant, and I was raised in working in restaurants and in customer service, and so like I got good with communicating with people.
Yeah.
And learning how to deal with these awkward situations and just keeping a straight face, even if it feels odd. And with like, and it gives you this good ability to just be able to like maintain a conversation, or to just talk, or fill empty space, or to, even if there is quiet, just to be able to sit there and like, and be okay with it and not be strange with it. And like, if you've got people like that in a group environment, then the people can learn from that when they see it, or they look at it and maybe they're not used to it. However, if there's no one like that, and say you've got this person who's just sort of socially awkward and they're a bit strange, sometimes if they're in the wrong group, if they approach a certain kind of people that are not patient, or they're quick to call strange, and to make it apparent to everyone in the room that it's strange, this can be, it can develop into a form of bullying. The person that's at the receiving end of this can develop more negatively as a result of those interactions, and sort of fall back onto what's safe, which is the computer again. And
weird thing, a little bit off the subject, but you're on Twitter.
Yes.
Have you seen it? Like, it's become regular school fights now. Have you seen this?
Well, they were regular anyway, but now they make good social media, and I think this is tied to the monetization of social media. That people might, and I don't know if it's becoming more common, or if it's just because we're more ready to record these things and post them on the internet. But I often wonder to what degree people are motivated to want to do something absurd because they know the cameras are on them and they know it might make them viral.
The reverse.
But it is strange. But like, it's not like fights weren't common. I had lots of fights in high school.
So I expected the generation raised on internet and phone to be too shy to do this stuff, but it turned out to be wrong, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm seeing like even like 5-on-1.
Incentivized. It's been incentivized because there was this one kid in London who filmed himself breaking into people's homes.
Wow.
And on social media, and he was like, we're gonna prank these people, and he would just walk into a family's home with his mates and record the live stream the whole thing.
Insane.
And then you've got this awkward interaction where like the woman's got a kid,
Yeah.
and she's like, "Honey, there's people in our," and then they're acting like it's their home
Wow.
when they know it's not. Everyone knows it's not their home, but there's this weird like awkward situation where it's like, "What are you doing in my house?" It's like, "It's my house. What are you on about?" It's like, "No, you know it's not your house. I know it's not your house. Why are we playing this game?" And then the husband's having to try to like tell these kids to get out. And it's not
Wow.
really
So this is a massive troll operation, basically.
yeah. And but
That's
these
hilarious.
things are incentivized because then
Yeah.
they go viral. And
Yeah.
like there's just this weird thing where like, yes, you'll get hate, but you'll also get this group of people
Yeah.
that say, "Don't listen to the haters. You know, you do you." And they sort
Yeah.
of like, and people incline to hating the haters
Yeah.
and loving the lovers. And
Well,
there's-
infamy is now a genre. Like you notice on Netflix, there are a lot of people who got famous for how bad they were, like
Yes.
Anna Delvey,
yeah.
people like that for doing terrible things. They got famous, and now people are reversing it. They're doing terrible things to be hated because being hated
Makes
and
you love.
famous,
by the outsiders, by the outcast. There's like
at least you're being recognized.
yes, and
when you're
it's still something that can be monetized.
Yeah.
And once it's monetized and you're wealthy and you have that certain amount of recognition and fame,
Yep.
then there are always going to people that give you attention and love
Yep.
you because you have that. And it's a strange phenomenon. And
Now, one of the things that you pointed to was very interesting. That you pointed to this idea that people only vote into power those who are supporting them in what they love. But the moment that all they love is leisure and freedom and liberty, you're actually perpetuating your own demise.
Yeah.
Which points basically the summary of that, the conclusion of that is democracy is only useful when people are educated on the right values and they have the right values, right?
Yeah,
At that point, democracy, if you flip that now, democracy is a source of your end.
Yes, and but this is incredibly because like for Brexit, I keep bringing Brexit up. Brexit was weird for me because it was like, what? We've got to make this decision, and then I'm looking into it and I'm like, I don't know what's the right answer. I've got no idea. And like the conversation popularized was mostly about immigration, but there was many other things related to that, like the control of a foreign body over our nation, the EU, you know, the collective interests of like a global economy. And like there was so many factors to this that if you were to make a decision on it, you had to take into consideration. And I was like, I'm too busy. I was a university student at the time. I just had a kid. You know, I'm married. I've got my own social relationships that I'm worried about, my own career, my own like, you know, educational development, spiritual development. There's all these things I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And it's like, and you're asking me to go and vote for this.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, why are you trusting me
Yeah.
to make this decision? And then when I would, and so in the end, I didn't vote for it. Because I didn't know what the right answer was. I was like, this would be better. You better ask some economists or something. Like someone with a degree that's in a position to be able to make this kind of decision.
Yeah.
But that's not what was happening with the rest of the population. There was 50% of us that just abstained from voting, but the other 50% were very vocal. And you asked them, and the 26% that voted Brexit were mostly like, bloody immigrants, get them out of here. We don't want them anymore. And the other 24% were like, we're not racist.
Yeah.
Vote to stay in the EU. And it's like, what? How is this decision been boiled down to whether or not you hate immigrants or whether or not you're not racist?
Yeah.
Like, why is that the thing that decides whether or not we stay as a part of this European Union or leave it? And it's like, it just became a game. It's like, this, you know, this is a complex issue. You have to read books and books and books to really understand it. And now what we're going to say is going to lead us one way or the other is this fiery debate between two controversial characters on daytime TV that people watch while eating their dinners and multitasking or getting drunk and like, you're like treating it like it's some sort of game show. Like, what is this? What's going on? And and I've got this theory as well.
Yeah.
Tell me if you think that I'm onto something. I have a theory that one of the reasons people like Donald Trump came into power is because of accelerationism. I think people that hated him voted for him because they thought this might be the end.
Yeah.
He might be the thing that brings the system
Let's
down.
just push the button and see what happens.
Yeah. And you've got this, you know, and I think this is also why you have this popularization of like end of times media. Like zombie apocalypse, end of the world, alien invasions, all of this, because people are sort of willing the end.
Yeah.
They want, and you see it even with evangelicals,
Yep.
where their interactions with the Zionists are in this weird. It's not like they're in favor of the Jews. The Jews rejected Christ as far as they're concerned. But like their relationship should be one of animosity, theologically speaking. But they've developed this weird union, and they're egging the Zionists on because they think it's going to bring about the end of time. To the point where they're even supplying them with the things in order for them to perform certain practices, like the 4 red heifers. Like
they were grown in Texas.
Yes, and given to the Zionists by evangelicals. And it's like, what's going on? Everyone's like willing the end now.
It's you see the signs of the end, but waiting is very painful, right?
Yes.
And even in the day of judgment, a man will knows he's going to hell, but the judgment takes so long, and so he starts saying, "Just put me in hell now." The waiting is painful. And people want to push the button. Yeah, they want to push the button and see what happens, right? Really interesting times. It was great talking to you. I'd love to have you on again. Anytime that you have a book, you have anything publication going on, let us know so you can come on, even for just 15 minutes. You come on and talk to us and share with your new ideas. Anytime. I loved having this conversation. I feel bad for taking so much of your time.
No. I can ramble for hours and hours and hours, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
We're the same in that respect. So, but thank you so much for coming on. And next time we're in England, inshallah, we meet up in person. And hey, if you ever come this stateside,
sometime. Well, I'm hoping to, inshallah.
Well, look, I'll send Hamza a message. Send Yusuf on an American tour. Right?
Inshallah.
We'd love to host you here.
So I just wanted to plug one more thing. So I've not just written the book with Sapiens Institute. I manage the Lighthouse project.
The Lighthouse project.
Yeah, the Lighthouse project. It's a service we offer that helps people specifically with a number of things. So the first thing is with doubts. So if you're a Muslim, an ex-Muslim, a soon-to-be Muslim, a non-Muslim, and you're thinking about Islam and you're not sure whether it's true or not, and you've got certain issues or doubts and you want to discuss them, you can book a free private one-to-one meeting with myself or one of the other mentors that I work with, and you get an hour of our time to just discuss whatever you want related to doubt. Or if you're engaged in dawah and you're getting asked questions, you're dealing with the first category and you're not sure how to answer them, or you want to engage in dawah and you're not quite sure where to begin. You're a leader in the community, an imam, a da'i, a father with children, or a mother, sometimes children with parents that are doubting. You can book a meeting. We can talk to you. We'd engage with answering certain questions on that subject. And we're also in the process of now setting up a new Muslim mentoring service as well, which runs on the same basis. You can book free private one-to-one meetings with a mentor to discuss things and discuss your development. It's completely free and it's private. We don't publish the recordings online on YouTube or anything. It's just a one-to-one on Zoom. And if you go to the website, sapiensinstitute.org, you'll see that there, along with our learning platform, which is, again, another free resource. You can get all of our books for free. My book you can get for free on our website, sapiensinstitute.org/books. You can get the physical copy, and Amazon will charge you something, but it's just whatever Amazon requires you to pay. We don't make any profit on that. But yeah, just have a look at our website, sapiensinstitute.org. Look at all of the resources we've got available there, the learning platform, the books, the essays, the Lighthouse project, etc.
Great. And the Lighthouse project, is someone call in or is it the email?
So you can book a meeting on there. You'll pick a time that's suitable for you, and then we'll send you a link and to a Zoom meeting. And you just need to make sure you turn up on time on the Zoom meeting, and the mentor will be there waiting for you.
Excellent.
You can engage in a discussion with them about your doubts or about getting involved in the dawah.
Great. And I met some of your associates in Houston who do this.
Yes.
Who work on this.
So the brother Fahad Sazim, Sheikh Fahad.
Yes.
Hamza Zortsis. So they're mentors as well. And then we have another bunch of brothers that are getting involved with us. And we're looking to expand as well. So we do want to make this a global project. So Sheikh Al-Jairi has just recently joined the organization. And inshallah, we're going to look at having him help do the project in Arabic. And we've got Sheikh Idrisi from Spain,
Ajib.
Mohammed Idrisi, and inshallah he's going to be offering the service and developing that in the Spanish as well. But we're in we're just because it's early days, so we're just trying to sort of establish ourselves, get a footing, and develop the training, etc. So it's a slow process.
It's a great project. Allah reward you. Jazakallah khairan. Thanks for coming on, and inshallah we will be talking again in the future.
Inshallah, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for having me on as well.
My pleasure. Jazakallah khairan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, there you have it, folks. That was very insightful, amazing topic that I love, which is just the concept of population. And that it's something, population and family are two things. When I grew up, you never gave it a second thought. When I was growing up, you never give this a second thought. It's not even a thing to be discussed. It's assumed. But you fast forward and you see all the zina spreading, and then the people of zina become in charge, like Bill Clinton, right? That generation. And then the next generation becomes in charge after them, and they're accustomed to more zina. And soon we're going to have people who have grown up with absolutely complete normalization of pornography and self-pleasuring and all that stuff being in charge. So what kind of laws are they going to put in place? What kind of policies? What kind of basic policies are they going to put in place if that's how they were raised? These are people who are not fit to move humanity forward. And it's something like growing up, you never thought that this was, a thing that was going to be possible, that this is even going to be a subject to be discussed. But here we are. That's where we're at. And the stuff that you see is now getting more and more disgusting. And you start wondering, these people, I'm sorry, I don't want to say it, but they just need to, if you are a document, if you are an image, I would just highlight, delete. I'm not even kidding you that this is going to sound so disgusting, but this is real. I'm watching one of these conservative talk shows, and they're interviewing a guy who used to be in the adult business and how he transformed himself. He said, we reached a low that you can't imagine. And he said, well, what was that low? And it was just like a clip, an interview, podcast interview. The guy said that we got so bored of everything that we started hiring women. And after all the stuff that they do with them, we said that part of the package, when we're done, we urinate on you. Like what? And they accepted. They want to be in the business so badly. The woman accepts. And they do it. They do all their zina and their garbage. It's not that disgusting enough. He finds it like we're so bored of everything. Let's take the new level and urination on another human being. And that other human being accepts it as part of the job. And then they interview them like, oh, you took it on the chin. You're a champ, right? Nobody's like you. You deserve every buck that you get. And she's smiling, right? It was tough, but we did it, right? And here's my money, right? You don't have a wali. You don't have a dad. Do you have a mom? Do you have a dad? Do you have anybody in your life to say, what the heck are you doing? Forget the first half. Nobody even say anything about the first half anymore. What about this part? Absolute stranger? And what's the difference between you and some of the behavior that goes on in India that everyone makes fun of, where the untouchables actually get urinated on? Like, you could do that in India. They have this. Untouchables are the worst of the worst for them. Okay? I can't understand at all where society's going. There's no way you shouldn't vote. You shouldn't have a say. And guess what? The people who watch this stuff will be the president someday. Someone who enjoys this stuff will one day be president, will one day be running a tech company. What kind of policies are they going to put in place? President of a tech company is more powerful than a governor, right? It's probably more powerful than 90% of the presidents in the world. What policies are they going to put in place? What are they going to consider to be what are they going to consider to be off limits? If that's what you grew up with from, let's say, watching this from age 9, 10, 11, that's what you started with. Because you can imagine, if it's happening on the internet, there's a 9-year-old boy somewhere, an 8-year-old, a 7-year-old, that's the first thing he sees. In the first year of his exposure to getting a phone or the internet, he sees that at age 7, at age 8, at age 9. So where is he going to go by age 12? What is the mentality, the norms, the standards of this human being going to be at age 30 when he takes over a company, or age 35 or age 50 when he runs a nation or a city or a town? And then people say, hey, we got what they call, I don't know, they have these laws, the local ordinances of the town, what's allowed in public and what's not. I'm telling you, where we're going is where the Prophet ﷺ said. He said, there will be a day near the end of time in which people will fornicate on the street like animals, in the road, just in the street. And the Prophet ﷺ said, the best of you at that time will say, can you do this behind a wall? That means there's going to be a debate someday. There's going to be a national debate on public, sex in public, right? And the good people will going to be the ones saying, no, it shouldn't be in public. They're not going to say no zina. Nobody will have the ability, or you'll be laughed at, to say, don't do zina, right? Don't fornicate. Don't have sex at all until you're married. Nobody will say that, okay? The good people will not be able to say that. You say that, you're going to be laughed at. The maximum you can say is, no, I don't think you should do it in public, right? And all these devils, these human devils, they're worse than Iblisi devils. They're human devils. They're trying to promote this in public. Because if people see it enough on a screen, zina in public on a screen, if they see it enough on a screen, the day he sees it in public, they're like, oh, they're filming. Well, they've seen it 1,000 times since the age of 7 on a screen. And that guy's the mayor. Then some mom comes to him and says, hey, these kids are doing fornicating on their front lawn. Right? Filming it on the front lawn. And they say, okay, let's discuss it. You bring the town panel. Hold on a second. Half the town panel has been watching this stuff since age 8. Why would they outlaw it? On what basis will they be disgusted? On what basis will they be shocked? That's where we're headed, right? Exactly what the Prophet ﷺ said. Okay. So in an absolute insane situation that we're headed to, that we're in. But again, here's the point. The Prophet ﷺ has told us well in advance where we're headed. And that's why when it happens, we're going to be level-headed. In fact, it's going to increase our iman. When that happens, we're going to say, hey, we told you so. We told you also. SubhanAllah. Ammar says here it's project desensitization. Exactly what it is. Complete desensitization. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 3:50. Wonderful conversation with our brother Yusuf Ponders. Ladies and gentlemen, jazakumullahu khairan. We will see you tomorrow. And don't forget to be a supporter on patreon.com. And that'll be it for today. Jazakumullahu khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Kalbe şiir